Aretha Franklin stopped mid-song. She was standing in front of 20,000 people in Detroit. She held the microphone. She closed her eyes. The arena went completely quiet. No one in that building knew what had happened. Only one person knew, and she was standing in the wings, holding an empty envelope. By the autumn of 1968, Aretha Franklin had been the most important voice in American music for nearly 2 years. Respect had gone to number 1 in the spring of 1967. Chain of Fools had followed. Think, A Natural Woman. Each one arriving with the same authority, the same quality of a woman who had finally found the exact register of what she had always been trying to say. The press had given her a title, the Queen of Soul. She wore it without apparent effort. But the Detroit show, on the evening of October 9th, 1968, was something different from a performance. Detroit was her city. She had been born there. Her father's church, New Bethel Baptist, was there. New Bethel had been C.L. Franklin's church since 1946. He was one of the most powerful preachers in the country, a man whose sermons were recorded and sold by chess records like album releases, a man whose voice carried the same electricity as the music that came out of his household. Growing up in that church meant growing up surrounded by the understanding that sound could do things to people, that a voice rightly directed could open something in a person that had been closed for a long time. Aretha had known this since she was small. She had stood at microphones in that sanctuary since she was old enough to reach one. Coming home to perform in Detroit was always more complicated than performing anywhere else. The crowd there was not strangers looking up at an icon. They were people who had known her when she was just C.L. Franklin's daughter. A woman named Clara arrived at the backstage entrance of the arena at 5:30 in the afternoon. She was 72 years old. She had taken 2 buses to get there. She was wearing her best coat, dark wool, carefully pressed, and she was carrying an envelope. She approached the security guard at the door and explained that she needed to leave something for Aretha Franklin. A letter. Personal. Important. She would not take any of Miss Franklin's time. She only needed someone to make sure the letter reached her before the show. The security guard told her politely that it was not possible. Clara did not argue. She was not a woman who wasted energy on arguments she could not win. She stood on the loading dock for a moment, looking at the envelope in her hands. Then she thanked the guard and walked away from the door and stood near the edge of the building in the October cold, trying to decide what she had left to try. She had been trying to deliver this letter, or something like it, for more than a year. She had written 3 earlier versions and discarded them. She had found one address and written to it and never received a response. She was 72 years old, and she had come this far, and she was not going home without trying one more time. A young production assistant came out of the building's side door on her way to get coffee. She saw the old woman standing alone in the cold and stopped, asked if she was all right. Clara explained briefly. She had a letter for Miss Franklin. It was the most important letter she had ever written. She had been carrying what it described for 29 years. The production assistant looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Give it to me. I'll try." Aretha received the envelope during the break between the first and second sets. She was in the dressing room with a towel across her shoulders and a glass of water in her hand, and her assistant set the envelope on the table beside her without explanation. She opened it, expecting nothing specific. Fan letters occasionally found their way backstage. Some were genuinely moving. Some were difficult in ways she had learned to move through quickly. She had received thousands of letters in her career from people who said her music had changed their lives, had helped them through illness or grief or loss. She had read them with gratitude and continued forward. This letter was different from the first line. She read it once. Then she read it again. Then she set the glass of water down very carefully and sat without moving for a while. What was in that letter was something that had happened 29 years earlier. In November of 1939, on a Sunday morning, in the sanctuary of New Bethel Baptist Church in Detroit. Clara had been 43 years old that Sunday. She had been living alone for 7 years, since her husband had died suddenly of a heart attack in 1932. The years since then had been hard in ways she had never found the language to explain to anyone. The loneliness had its own weight. The mornings especially. Each morning was a small argument she had with herself about whether to get up. For several weeks before that November Sunday, she had been losing that argument more often than she was winning it. She had gotten up that particular morning and put on her church clothes without fully understanding why. She had not attended services in months. She walked to New Bethel because it was nearby and because she had no other direction to walk. She sat in the back row of the sanctuary, away from the people she might have known, and waited for the service to begin. Then a child walked to the front of the room. The child was small, perhaps 6 or 7 years old. She wore a white dress. The microphone at the front of the sanctuary was too tall for her, so she stood on the tips of her toes and leaned into it, and she sang. Clara wrote in the letter that she could not remember the name of the song. She had tried many times over the years to recover it. It was gone. What she remembered was not the song, but the sensation of hearing it, the feeling of a child singing with an openness that held nothing back. Not performing, not trying, simply giving the sound everything she had and trusting that it would land somewhere. Clara had not cried in years. She had stopped being able to cry somewhere in the 3rd year of living alone. The feeling had dried up along with other things. She cried in that church that Sunday morning. She said in the letter that she had walked out of the service afterward and found, to her own confusion, that something had changed inside her, that she no longer wanted to do what she had been thinking of doing, that the child's voice had returned something to her that she had not realized was gone. She could not explain it in any logical way. She only knew it was true. For 29 years she had carried that Sunday, the memory of the white dress and the tipped toes and the sound of that voice. She had never known the child's name. She had asked people afterward, people who attended New Bethel, and no one had been able to identify her with certainty. She had eventually stopped asking and simply kept the memory as something she owed to someone unknown. She had found the name in the spring of 1967, when a photograph of Aretha Franklin ran on the front page of a music magazine above an article about respect. She had recognized the face before her mind caught up with the recognition, not consciously, with the body. The way you know something true before you can explain why you know it. She had sat with the magazine in her lap for a long time. Then she had started, carefully, to write. Aretha Franklin walked back onto the stage in Detroit on the evening of October 9, 1968. The band started the next number on the set list. She sang the opening line. Then she stopped. She looked at her conductor and said something quietly. He nodded to the band. They held. The crowd murmured. In any other venue, with any other performer, this might have seemed like a technical problem. In Detroit, with Aretha, 20,000 people understood within moments that this was something else. The murmuring subsided. They went quiet the way audiences go quiet when they understand that what is happening in front of them is no longer a performance. Aretha walked to the piano. She sat down. She said to the crowd, "I want to do something for someone who is here tonight." She did not explain further. Then she played the opening chord of Amazing Grace. It was not on the set list. It had not been rehearsed. It was a hymn, a church song, not the kind of record she was known for, not what anyone in that building had come expecting to hear. She sang it from beginning to end, alone at the piano, her voice doing in that arena what it had always been capable of doing in the right room, making the air change. People in the front rows were crying before she reached the second verse. They could not have explained why. They did not know what she had read, what the letter contained, what had produced this moment. They only knew what they were feeling, which was something that had no name and did not need one. When the song ended, Clara was standing in the wings of the stage. The young production assistant had found her still waiting outside and had brought her in. She stood at the side of the stage in her good coat, close enough to see Aretha's hands on the piano keys, and she did not speak. She stood there until the song was over. Then she quietly made her way out of the building and walked to the bus stop and went home. Aretha Franklin kept the letter. She did not discuss it publicly for many years. When journalists asked about the unplanned Amazing Grace that night, she said only that it had felt like the right thing to do in that moment. The people who knew her well said they had seen her carry that letter, or something they understood to be that letter, with her for years after. In her bag, on tour, in the places where she kept the things that mattered most. Clara died in 1974 at the age of 78. She attended 2 more of Aretha's concerts in the years after Detroit. She went alone both times. She did not try to send another letter. She had said what she needed to say. The debt she had carried for 3 decades had been acknowledged. That was enough. What that letter meant to Aretha in the private hours, in the spaces between the performances and the recordings and the public life, is something that belongs only to her. But the 20,000 people who were in that arena on the evening of October 9th, 1968, remember the stillness. They remember a woman sitting alone at a piano singing a hymn that had not been announced. They remember not knowing why and feeling it anyway. Something moved through that room that could not be accounted for by anything visible, except by one woman walking to a bus stop in the cold, who knew exactly what it was and had been waiting 29 years to give it back. Subscribe to Untold Soul Legends. Every week we go behind the music, into the moments the history books almost missed. Hit the bell so you never miss a story. And share this with someone who needs to hear it today. These stories deserve to be heard.